right, hello everyone. Sorry for the slight delay in starting here. Thanks for joining us today. This is an HOA forum on voting and proxies in Colorado common interest communities, or homeowners associations as they're more popularly known. Today is Friday, March 1st, and it is 1 p.m. My name is Nick Altman. I'm the HOA Information Officer with the Colorado Division of Real Estate. We also have Amanda Lopez here. Amanda is our HOA program assistant, and she's going to help monitor some of the chat questions. Hi, Amanda.
Hi, Nick. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Happy Friday. We look forward to watching this presentation, Nick. So thank you.
Great. So for today, we'll be using Zoom. You'll be able to use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to post your comments and questions, and we'll do our best to answer them throughout the course of the presentation. And also, we'll take some time to try and answer them live at the end as well. For your information, this presentation will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel. Compared to some of our other forums, this will probably be relatively quick, maybe about 20 or 25 minutes of me talking, and then we'll do a Q&A session at the end. So thanks a lot for joining. Again, this is going to be a presentation on voting and proxies, and the purpose is to provide an overview of these concepts, including secret ballots, and other information that you might run into in your community when you're trying to understand voting and proxies. So we always begin our presentations with the do's and don'ts of what we, the HOA Information and Resource Center, do. So what do we do? We provide information to homeowners regarding their basic rights and responsibilities under the Colorado Common Interest Ownership Act, or commonly abbreviated as KIOA. The center gathers, analyzes, and reports information through complaints and HOA registrations. We create resource materials. We provide education and forums like the one that you're watching right now. We provide a website to the public with information. We register HOAs pursuant to KIOA Section 401. And we also provide an annual report to the state legislature. So what the Information Center does not do includes acting as a regulatory program. We do not mediate or arbitrate on behalf of any one party. We cannot provide legal advice. We don't act as an advocate. We cannot assess fines or penalties. And we do not enforce an HOA's failure to register. And as always, a quick disclaimer: the information provided during this presentation is meant for educational purposes only and should not be meant to provide or be construed as legal advice. Any legal questions should be directed to a qualified attorney licensed in Colorado. Who is this presentation for? This presentation is for homeowners residing within common interest communities, board members of those communities, and also community association managers. All right, so we'll start with quorums. So to understand voting and proxies, we also have to understand the notion of quorums in your community. So what is a quorum? Oxford Dictionary defines quorum as the minimum number of members of an assembly that must be present at any of its meetings to make the proceedings of that meeting valid. What does that mean exactly? So that means at your HOA meetings, if the necessary number of owners or board members are not present, then any vote or action taken at that meeting is legally invalid. Suffice to say that the meeting may as well never have occurred. So why is quorum important? Quorum is important because it prevents board members from acting in their own self-interests. without first receiving majority approval. And without quorum, votes can't be taken, rules can't be changed, and business can't be conducted. And we'll talk a little bit more about how HOAs can utilize proxies to meet quorum and increase homeowner participation. So just as a refresher here, how is quorum met at the regular annual homeowners meeting? Despite what state law says, your specific HOA's bylaws will control first. So if your bylaws state, for example, 25% of unit owners must be present to begin a meeting, that requirement will take priority over Kiowa. However, if your bylaws are silent on quorum requirements, the community must revert to Kiowa, which specifies 20% of votes which may be cast for election of a board makes a quorum. So just as a point to make, this doesn't mean necessarily 20% of all owners, but rather 20% of the votes, which would need to be cast at an election of the board of directors, would need to be present and voting. If you have a community member, they might wield, say, 5% voting power at elections compared to a community member who only has 1% voting power. So keep in mind that there is a different allocation of votes, and it doesn't always mean that one person controls one vote. This allocation of votes would need to be checked in your specific governing documents, which all governing documents should have. I'll talk a little bit more about voting allocation here in a second. And then finally, number 3 on this slide, if your HOA has more than 1,000 units, that percentage is reduced to 10% of the votes in order to make a quorum from 20%. All right, so we talked about quorum at your annual homeowners meetings. What about quorum for board meetings? Again, the bylaws control first. If your bylaws are silent, which more likely than not, they probably won't be, but if they are silent, Kiowa steps in and provides that 50% of the votes on the board must be present at the beginning of the meeting or grant their proxy in order to make a quorum. So if you have a 5-member board and each board member has, say, 20% voting share, a board meeting at which only 2 board members are in attendance would not count toward quorum, since only 40% of the total voting power is present. Likewise, a board member who is out of town and knows that she wouldn't be able to attend the board meeting would be able to grant her proxy to another board member, thus adding her 20% voting share to the quorum pool. And then finally, what if your community is a pre-Kiowa community? According to the Colorado Nonprofit Act, for any type of meeting in pre-Kiowa communities, board or annual, 25% of the votes makes a quorum. And this is enumerated in section 206 of the Nonprofit Act. All right, so with quorums in Kiowa communities, it's important to keep in mind that a quorum is not needed in order for a majority of unit owners to effectively veto or kill a proposed budget. While this office is only an educational office and can't provide a legal opinion, it's my interpretation that this provision more easily allows homeowners to veto a budget for those communities which might have unattainable quorum requirements. Maybe a community that has 60% owner representation, as an example, to make a quorum. If you're a board member and you're concerned about getting the budget passed, you might consider holding your budget ratification meeting separate from the annual homeowners meeting, a meeting which does have those specific quorum requirements in order to be valid. Another important point to make with Kiowa and quorum is regarding the removal of board members. Kiowa states that notwithstanding any provision of the declaration or bylaws to the contrary, the unit owners, by a vote of 67% of all persons present and entitled to vote at any meeting of the unit owners at which a quorum is present, may remove any member of the executive board with or without cause, other than a member appointed by the declarant. Now, this doesn't mean 67% of all the unit owners in your community are required to remove a board member. This, in fact, means that 67% of all those who are entitled to vote at an owner meeting in which the quorum has been established are required to remove the board member. So suppose that your annual meeting requires 20% quorum and your community has 20 units. 5 homeowners who show up in addition to the board, well, with 25% homeowner representation being achieved, quorum has been met. If a vote is being taken to remove a board member at that meeting, at least 4 owners would need to vote in the affirmative, as 3 is not quite reaching the 67% threshold. So the same calculation would also apply for communities with, say, 50, 100, or 500 units. And then finally, one last point to make about quorum. Voting members should be physically present at the beginning of the meeting. Why is this important? Because maybe a unit owner could possibly arrive late to the annual meeting and may not be counted toward quorum. Likewise, if a unit owner needs to leave early, maybe to pick up their kid from soccer practice or make dinner for the family, whatever, their absence should not deduct from the quorum, since they were physically present at the beginning of that meeting. All right, so let's get into voting allocations. So according to Kiowa, the declaration must allocate a portion of the votes to each unit in the association. The declaration must also state the formula used to establish such allocation, and the allocation may not discriminate in favor of units owned by the declarant or an affiliate of the declarant. Such allocations could be based on, depending on your community's square footage, lot size, votes per parcel, or number of bedrooms, just as an example. You'll want to check your own governing documents for the particulars on how votes are allocated in your community. So remember that this counts toward quorum as well. So if Dan down the street, for example, carries 2 votes due to his property containing more square footage than Mary's, Dan also possesses greater weight toward meeting quorum requirements at his community meetings. Check your governing documents. All right, so a very important section of the Colorado Nonprofit Act that I think a lot of people don't realize or understand is that unless stated otherwise in the bylaws, any action that may be taken at any annual, regular, or special meeting of members may be taken without a meeting if the nonprofit corporation delivers a written ballot to every member entitled to vote on the matter. So I know that's kind of a lot, but essentially this means that important events that occur in your community that you may otherwise struggle to gain enough homeowner participation for, such as elections or voting on proposed amendments to the governing documents, those important events may be done outside of a meeting so long as the board fulfills this requirement of sending a written ballot to every member entitled to vote on that matter. So let's talk about a little bit what should go on those written ballots. Should your community decide that it wants to utilize the power of written ballots? All right, so for written ballots, the association has to comply with the Nonprofit Corporation Act, subsection 109. And that states that a written ballot must state each proposed action. For example, such a proposed action could be something like the association shall stagger the terms of directors. For example, a president and treasurer shall be subject to re-election every odd year, while the vice president and secretary shall be subject to re-election every even year, something that would require homeowner approval. The ballot should provide an opportunity to vote for or against the proposed action. In most cases, this is a simple yes or no, or A or nay. For elections, so for complete transparency, if you're a board member or CAM sending out the ballots, be sure to include on the ballot both the number of responses needed in order for a quorum to be met, as well as the number of approvals required to approve the matter in bold. And I want to be sure to put this in bold. Had that vote occurred at the corresponding required in-person meeting. So if a vote would have had to been required at a board meeting, the same quorum and approval numbers would have to be met with the ballot than what the board meeting requires. Same with the annual homeowners meetings. Both requirements must be met in order for the votes, in order for the corresponding number of physically received ballots to be valid. I know that could be confusing, but if there are any questions about that, I'm happy to try and clarify. If sending out a written ballot, a written solicitation letter should also be sent out to owners. And on that solicitation letter, there are a couple items that should be included. Number one being the number of responses that are needed in order to meet quorum requirements, the percentage of approvals necessary to approve each matter other than the election of directors, the time by which a ballot must be received by the association in order to be counted. And then finally, the letter should be accompanied by written information that's sufficient to allow each person casting such a vote to reach an informed decision on the matter. So what that means is if the letter simply states the association is looking to amend bylaws subsection 3 part 4, that probably wouldn't be enough information for your owners to make an informed decision on the matter, and instead you would have to include detailed specific information on that proposed action. Keep in mind too that if more than one person is running for a position, which is also known as a contested election, in those scenarios, secret ballots must be used. This means owners have to be afforded an opportunity to cast their vote without being identified, either in person or on the written ballot. An effective mechanism that I see is using the double envelope system, where the outside envelope is considered the return envelope, which has the owner's address, name, and so on and so forth on the envelope. And then the inside envelope contains the ballot without any identifying owner information. So that way, when the CAM or the board member who's in charge of collecting those ballots opens up the outside envelope, they take the ballot, put it into a separate pile, and then that pile contains all the votes without identifying who the owner was who voted on that matter. Such a system allows for the votes to be counted both accurately and anonymously by your neutral third party or committee of volunteers. All right, so Kiowa does require secret ballots to be utilized at section 310. And when exactly are those ballots required to be utilized? So first, secret ballots must be utilized for contested positions on your board of directors, simply meaning there's more than one person running for the same position on the board. Secret ballots must be utilized. This requirement doesn't apply if your governing documents provide for the election of directors through delegates who cast votes on behalf of a segment, but that's not too common. And for the most part, your community likely will require secret ballots to be used in these situations. Secret ballots could also be utilized at the discretion of the board of directors whenever they deem fit. In some communities, the board prefers to use secret ballots for pretty much every time a vote occurs or every item which requires a vote. This gives members the ability to cast their vote without any perceived pressure or, I guess, fear from their board or their neighbors. And then finally, secret ballots are required to be utilized on any issue where 20% of the owners present in person or by proxy at the meeting of the members request the use of a secret ballot on an issue. So at a meeting, the board of directors may determine that, we don't need to use secret ballots. It's okay, we'll just use regular ballots. But if 20% of the owners demand that a secret ballot be used, then the association has to comply with that requirement. And so after votes are cast at the unit owner meeting by secret ballot, there are a couple of things to know. First, I already mentioned those ballots have to be counted by a neutral third party. What is a neutral third party, you might ask? Well, there's nothing that would expressly prohibit the community manager or the community's attorney from counting the ballots, although they might want to refrain from doing so just to avoid any kind of notion of impropriety or a conflict of interest. So instead, I've seen associations use their accountant to count the ballots, or really just any neutral third party who has no vested interest in the outcome of the vote. And then second, so a neutral third party has to count the ballots. And number two, a committee of volunteers or a committee of volunteers can be appointed by the board to count the ballots. So if a committee of volunteers is utilized, whoever is presiding over the meeting, like the HOA president or the chair, they should select members of the HOA to serve on that committee of volunteers. Such a committee cannot be composed of members of the board or any candidate in a contested election for a position of the board. All right, so let's talk about proxies now. So what is a proxy? A proxy can be defined as a writing that could be on a college ruled piece of paper or a bar napkin, provided certain conditions are met. A proxy is a writing that an owner provides to another person. The person can be any person of legal age. And then a writing that an owner provides to another person that authorizes the other person to act on behalf of the owner in accordance with its terms. Terms which could be general or directed. So a general proxy allows the holder of the proxy to act in any manner they seem fit to use the issuer's vote in any way that they deem fit or necessary. That's a general proxy. A directed proxy is when the issuer of the proxy establishes certain criteria to vote in a certain way. So the individual, the proxy holder can only vote in accordance to how the issuer determines or demands. The Colorado Nonprofit Corporation Act describes how proxies may be appointed. In it says that unless otherwise provided in the declaration, bylaws, or rules of the association, an individual has great latitude in how they can appoint a proxy, either by signing an appointment form, transmitting or authorizing the transmission of a telegram, teletype, or other electronic transmission, providing a written statement of the appointment, which shall include or be transmitted with written evidence from which it can be determined that the individual transmitted or authorized the transmission of the appointment. That's a very extreme legalese for a simple email. And then a quick note here that Senate Bill 22059 was passed and made into law back in 2022. That Senate bill amended Kiowa to clarify that proxies terminate 11 months after its date, after the date that's shown on the proxy. unless the proxy itself indicates an earlier termination date. It's my understanding that this Senate bill was used to help associations or homeowners avoid the notion of proxy mining or harvesting, whereby a board member might have been accumulating or collecting undated proxies to continue to run the association the way they wanted to. So this bill made it so that the proxy automatically terminates 11 months after its date, unless there's an earlier date indicated on the proxy. All right, so why should we use proxies, or why should associations use proxies? Number one, they help to achieve quorum. If you're a board member, you likely understand how difficult it is to get enough people to show up to your board and annual meetings. By canvassing the community and asking owners to grant their proxy, either to the board or to a trusted neighbor, you can ensure that quorum is properly met and that business can be conducted at your meetings. Suggesting the use of proxies is also an effective way to educate owners on issues in the community. It gives board members an opportunity to meet their neighbors, to understand what's going on, and to educate people on issues that are important to the community. Issues which very well may impact how much they pay in assessments, for example. If you're lucky, you may even have enough interest to gather around a campfire and sing Kumbaya, a campfire that is, of course, permitted by the HOA documents. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what is a valid proxy and what is an invalid proxy. So keep in mind that the association is entitled to reject a vote, proxy, or written ballot if the secretary or other officer or agent who is authorized to tabulate votes by acting in good faith has reasonable basis for doubt about the validity of the signature on it or about the signatory's authority to sign for the unit owner. So to just as a tip to help eliminate any notion of doubt, each proxy should contain the name, the address, and the signature of the owner who is granting it. So HOA Center gets a lot of inquiries and questions about how this is possible with online Zoom meetings, for example. So online meetings should be, first permitted in accordance with the bylaws of the association, so long as whoever the meeting chair or person running the meeting is able to validate the name, address, and signature of the owner who's voting, and the capability to allow people to vote anonymously is allowed. I know I'm not quite sure if Zoom allows that capability, but if you have any doubt or hesitation, you should consult with legal counsel on the matter. Just a couple quick questions here about proxies. So sometimes homeowners, they wonder if they have to use the HOA or community manager's approved proxy form. So the answer is no, they don't. But if the board and manager has put work into building such a proxy form and ensuring that it's clear and an effective way for owners to vote, the owner, if you're an owner, you should probably consider using it. Otherwise, you can use a piece of paper or even a napkin, provided that it contains those three key components: your name, address, and your signature. Another question is, when is the proxy considered actually received by the association? Colorado Nonprofit Act kind of builds this out in Section 203. It's usually a proxy is received once it's presented at the beginning of the meeting. If you walk into a homeowner meeting and you hand your proxy form over to the secretary, that is considered received by the association. And then, can I turn in my proxy to the board before the meeting vote occurs? To my knowledge, there's nothing that would prohibit this in state law, unless the ballot or governing document specifically sets a deadline in which votes and proxies have to be submitted to the association. All right, and then remember, if you're a board member or community manager, transparency is always key when running a community. When the vote is held, the association should get in the practice of announcing the results immediately, if possible, or as soon as practicable. Would 2 weeks or a month after the election be practicable? Probably not. And don't assume that your owners will know, because a lot of them don't show up to the meetings in the first place. Try and communicate the results either at the meeting in which the vote was taken, by email, by mail, if the association doesn't have any exorbitant mailing costs, by newsletter, or on the HOA's website or web portal. Remember that a lot of people in your community have jobs and everyday lives, so they might not be able to attend the meeting, and don't assume that they'll know all the happenings in the meeting either. So communicating the results is an excellent best practice. Can the board conduct action by email? That's another question that the HOA Center frequently receives. So first, you'll want to check the bylaws to see if such an action is permitted. And if the bylaws are silent on this matter, Colorado Revised Nonprofit Act, our friends, section 202 controls, which is the section on an action being taken without a meeting. So basically, in order to comply with this section, each board member must be notified in writing that an action or a vote, by action typically that means a vote, is being considered to be taken by electronic vote. And then each board member also has to have been offered an opportunity to vote either for or against such an action being occurred. A helpful tip is a board member may demand an action not be taken by email and instead be taken at a regular in-person physical meeting. Such a demand has to be in writing and be provided by the time stated in the notice. I think that's a section a lot of board members don't realize exists, or that votes don't always have to be taken by email. And board members do have the ability to request that a vote be taken at a regular board meeting or annual meeting. Okay, just a couple pro tips here. If you're a board member, remember to not shred documents, specifically ballots, proxies, and other records related to voting by unit owners for 1 full year after the election, action, or vote to which they relate. That is directly Kiowa subsection 317, association records. If you're a board member, consider just holding all your votes and actions by secret ballot, just to help those homeowners who might be concerned about harassment or retaliation, which are very real things. If you're a unit owner, try and find out when your meetings are being held. And if you know you can't make it, assign your proxy to a trusted neighbor so that they can vote in your stead. For board members, don't forget to try and schedule your meetings for times that owners can actually show up to. A lot of times I see meetings being scheduled at 4 p.m. when people are still at work, or at kind of crazy hours like 9:30 p.m. when people are getting ready for bed. So that makes it difficult to encourage community participation. Board members, again, try and ensure transparency by announcing the results of the votes, and use it. Don't take the fact that, if people don't show up to board meetings, try not to take that personally, but rather use it as an opportunity to network with the neighborhood and try and get people more involved. The board members are volunteer positions, but they are important positions. On that same vein, you shouldn't treat it as like an ivory tower type of role. You should do your best to try and get out and meet people and talk to people. I think that's the whole idea of how a well-run democracy works. So just as a tip for board members, consider creating like a prize, for example, just to get people to show up. Maybe a drawing for a gift card to a local restaurant might be good incentive. And then also just if you're a unit owner, show your appreciation. If you think of board members doing a good job, or if they're trying their best, send them an email saying thanks for a job well done. I think simple things like that go a long way in the hard world of HOAs. All right, so that concludes this presentation on voting and proxies and also quorums. I hope you kind of learned something. I hope you got something out of this presentation. You can check out HOA resources for yourself at our website, which is https://dre.colorado.gov/HOA-center or -center. You can also send your inquiries via email with, if I wasn't able to answer a particular question you might have had on voting, ballots, or proxies, feel free to send an email to Dora_DRE_HOA inquiries at state.co.us. And then let's get to some questions here. So it looks like we have 37 or so questions in the chat. Let's see if I can see if any of these have not already been answered, or maybe I can go over a couple of these. All right, so one question here is, what year did Kiowa come into being? I believe that's July 1st, 1992. When you say physically present, does that include Zoom? I would say that would be present electronically, not physically. Usually that term applies to in-person meetings. What does physically present mean? Our HOA refuses to do in-person meetings. The answer to that, provided that your association's governing policies do not restrict that, then yes, attendance by Zoom or some other virtual setting would be sufficient. Can a board member who's going out of town give their vote by proxy on an issue to the property manager? I don't think there's anything that would prohibit that, although you'll want to check to see if your documents allow for that. But again, if you're a board member and you know you'll be out of town, you might just want to give it to another board member. Not to say that you don't trust your community manager, but just to be safe, you probably just want to give it to another board member. Please verify that to veto a budget, it requires a simple majority of the entire community, and that the quorum requirements otherwise used do not apply. So Kiowa, it expressly says, I go back to that slide. A quorum is not needed at the meeting, which is used to veto the budget. That is stated in Kiowa. And it does not require a majority of the entire community. It requires a majority of all those who are present and entitled to vote at the meeting in which a quorum has been met. So a quorum first has to be met, and then a majority of all the owners who are entitled and physically present at that meeting are needed to veto the budget. I've seen if a majority of other ways of kind of conceptualizing that is if by default, if a majority of all your unit owners do not show up at your budget ratification meeting, the budget is by default passed. Can ballots be via email for votes for directors at the annual meeting? So with respect to the use of proxies by directors at board meetings, the 3 requirements apply. 1, it has to be authorized according to your bylaws. 2, the director has granted a signed written proxy to another director present at the meeting. And 3, the proxy is directed, meaning it provides instruction regarding how to vote on specific items. let's see, since the board generally decides who fills specific officer roles, directors are elected by the members and officers are appointed or elected by the directors. The example provided about the president being elected in odd years and even years is a bit odd, isn't it? The treasurer and president, etc., might change every year, even if the directors themselves not change, unless your declaration requires a higher percentage than yes. Excuse me, I was not answering the right question there. So yeah, I tried to come up with an example in which an action or a vote would be needed by the homeowners, which, for example, the bylaws usually requires, unless your bylaws state otherwise, they usually require homeowner approval. So I just wanted to come up with an example of a ballot specifically stating what the proposed action is. So there's something to do with changing your governing documents. Usually rules and regulations don't need homeowner approval, but anywhere that, say, your declaration or your bylaws would require homeowner approval, the proposed action, it can't really be vague. It has to include specifics on what exactly the proposed amendment is. See if I can organize some of these questions. I'm just quickly going through these here. My HOA refuses to use the 2-envelope secret ballot. They insist that when envelopes are opened, nobody looks. What can we do to show them it's needed? It's kind of hard to say, really. I mean, if you can't really force an association to do the double envelope method, it's just a best practice to ensure that they're in compliance with state law. If votes are weighted by square footage, how can the vote be secret? Well, it's not a vision that there's only one unit with, say, 1,200 square feet. There could very well be 6 or 7 units with 1,200 square feet. And also, I'm not sure that it's a requirement on the secret ballot to specify the square footage. Just that it allows the owner to vote anonymously. Can volunteer, and again, I try my best to answer these, and I'll be the first to admit I don't know everything under the sun about HOA law, even though it's my job. But doing my best here. Can volunteer or volunteer committee that counts the votes disqualify nominee owners who are past due on their assessment fees? Yeah. So one of the provisions is HOAs are allowed to determine. They are allowed to. How do I say this? Certain owners may be prohibited from voting if they're, say, delinquent on their assessments or other factors. They are allowed to prevent someone, although they're not allowed to prevent them from attending the meeting, but they are allowed to prevent them from voting if they're behind on their assessments. That also brings up another point, which I think I forgot to mention. The ballots. If written ballots are being used, a line should be included, say, on elections, for write-in nominees. So if the association has already interviewed multiple people and they know who is going to run for a director position, they also need to be sure to include a blank line for write-in nominees, or people who just want to throw their hat in the ring at the meeting to run for the board position. Is CAM the community manager? Yes. CAM stands for Community Association Manager, or what some people refer to as a property manager. The term CAM is just used to distinguish from apartment managers, which most of the time requires a real estate license. Do proxies terminate if the meeting for budget ratification has ended without a vote due to an invalid or flawed budget proposal? I would say so. Anytime an owner issues a proxy to another owner or individual to vote in their stead, typically it's used on the proxy itself. It has to state a date, name, and address and signature. And the proxy terminates 11 months after the date on the proxy. So in other words, it can't be used to cast multiple votes for multiple meetings. What if the CAM is a home property owner? Are they really considered a neutral third party, especially as they're easily influenced directly by the board? There should be a policy in place at the HOA to understand what happens in the event. I mean, there's nothing that would prevent a CAM or an owner from becoming a CAM and serving on their board. But there should be a policy in place to help the association understand when a potential conflict of interest could occur. Yeah, and then to clarify on Mark's question about the proxies terminating, it would also depend on the language in the proxy itself. So, some proxies are good only for one meeting, while other proxies are good for longer. But again, they do terminate 11 months after they're issued. Does Kiowa declare that a CAM is automatically considered a neutral third party? No, I don't think it does anywhere. But again, if the CAM has any, if there's any notion at all that the CAM could benefit or be harmed by the outcome of the vote, they should abstain or refrain from acting as that third party, neutral third party. If you have even the slightest hesitation or inclination, just don't even do it. Sure are a lot of questions. Trying my best to get through these here. And Amanda, if you have any questions that you notice, feel free to.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm going
here
through it too. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, COVID did change a lot of ways in which HOA meetings are ran. A lot of HOAs went online. They started to use Zoom. So take a look at your policy and make sure that your meeting, when you're when you're holding these meetings to conduct votes, that you're allowing members to vote anonymously, and also that the board is able to verify who is voting, just in terms of meeting quorum, so that there's no duplicate members, or for example, logging in with multiple devices. The HOA should try and ensure that, I could use my iPhone, I could use my iPad and my personal computer to log in and try and count for 3 votes. So the association has to have some way of matching a login to the owner, while at the same time allowing that owner to vote anonymously.
Okay, I see a few. Sorry, Nick, I didn't mean to cut you off. I knew you were going to talk. But I see a question in here. I'm not sure if you went to this one. I don't think you did. I'm following along with you. So, when you say in writing, he says the phrase in writing is used a lot throughout So does it have to be a piece of paper in writing? Can it be a piece of paper scanned and sent by email? And I assume it doesn't mean just an email. So how does that have to be sent out?
Can you repeat that question one more time, Amanda?
Yep. So in writing is used a lot throughout. So does it have to be a piece of paper or can it be a piece of paper scanned? So when you say that they have to be in writing.
Yeah, like by in writing, usually I think typically that means not verbally. So you can't just call and say you want to issue a proxy, but it has to be either in writing by email or on a physical piece of paper.
Thank you.
And I do see a couple comments in here about the budget veto process. If I did misstate that or say something that didn't sound right, feel free to send me an email and I'll clarify what I tried to say or how I thought I interpreted that portion of the law. But feel free to send me an email and I'll follow up with that. But yeah, I think unless there's anything else on here, Amanda, that I missed, I'm going to call the meeting here. So again, thanks everybody for joining today. I hope you have a great meeting. Stay tuned on our announcements, on our division announcement for our special. We have a special guest joining us for next month. Stay tuned on our announcements. I hope to see all of you there, and please let your community members know, as well as your fellow board members, that we do host these HOA forums, and we intend for them to be as helpful and informative as possible. We're always accepting feedback, so please feel free to send me an email. And with that, we'll go ahead and stop this meeting. So thanks again, everybody, for joining, and I hope you have a great weekend. All right, thanks again. Bye.